Bloomin' heck, more murders. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Heather. I am a crime writer. I talk about true crime, supernatural, books and writing. If you like that kind of content, stick around. I didn't ask about putting this bloody wall hanging all over my whiteboard for no reason and wasting my beautiful candles for nothing. I also whacked out my fancy cheap plastic goblet to have some wine in because this one's difficult to get through. I want to start with a little bit of a disclaimer for this one. I mean no disrespect to the families of the people involved in this case. Unless you were the murderer, then lots of disrespect to you. Disrespect all over you. Bitch. But anyone who was affected by this, the ex-husband or the family of the victims, anyone who knew the victims, no disrespect to any of those. This video is purely for educational purposes. I collected the information that was in public domain and I compiled it all into one video. I say that because the relatives of the people involved in this case are still alive and the killer is still in prison. So I will say that at the beginning of videos where victims are still alive, or if it was recent, if families are still alive, if the killer is still alive, because I will call you out directly and call you a massive bitch. Let's go. So the Bamber's farm is located in Essex, and they had a prominent farming business in the 1980s. June and Neville Bamber, both 61, owned the farm, as well as N&J Bamber Limited, the company, estimated to be around £1.5 million in today's money. Mega bucks. Neville was a former RAF pilot and a farmer, and his wife inherited the farm from her family. He was a big man, 6'2", which will come into play later on when we talk about what happened to them. It's important to note how big he was. They were unable to have children of their own, so they adopted 2 babies from birth, pretty much. First 2 months, at least. June suffered from depression and had to go through electrotherapy a couple of times. Her doctor was the one who would later go on to treat her adopted daughter, Sheila. Their adopted children, Jeremy and Sheila Bamber, came to live with them on the farm. Sheila was a retired model with 2 children of her own, Daniel and Nicholas, both aged 6 years old. They were twins. Jeremy was the only family member to survive the attack. The wills of both parents were split equally between the 2 children, although June wanted to bypass the 2 children and leave everything directly to the boys, the young boys, Daniel and Nicholas, who were 6. June was incredibly religious and tried to instill these beliefs onto her children and her grandchildren. Her grandchildren didn't really like going to visit, as they had to join in with June's praying. June's relationship was very strained with Sheila, as well as with Jeremy. Sheila felt that June disapproved of her, and the 2 children grew up not to visit their parents very often at all. Jeremy even stopped talking to his mother altogether. So, one day, the family came together for a little visit. Sheila took her 2 boys to visit her parents before the boys went abroad with their father. The parents had divorced, but they still remained active parents in their children's lives, and they worked together when it came to raising the boys. The boys didn't like staying at the farm at all. One of them was even found to have written "I hate this place" on his bedroom wall. Jeremy visited the farm at around 9:30 p.m. and he was seen by several people who worked on the farm. He mentioned to police later on that there was talk of Sheila's children being placed into daytime foster care. It was recommended by her doctor that she needed some daytime help. Taking the boys off her altogether, which had been done previously, would have been met with a large-scale, full-frontal argument. So June suggested maybe placing them in foster care. Jeremy said that Sheila didn't say much to this and agreed. On the 7th of August, Jeremy called Chelmsford Police Station to say that he had had a call from his father saying his sister had gone berserk and she had a gun. The line apparently went dead after Jeremy heard a gunshot on the other end. This became a concern for police for several reasons. Why call Chelmsford Police Station instead of 999? The line wouldn't have gone dead after hearing a gunshot unless Neville had the time to hang up the phone. But when police investigated the home, the phone was hanging off the hook. so it couldn't have gone dead. Once it reached investigation time, Jeremy had driven to the house a lot slower than the police. The police arrived first, and Jeremy arrived 2 or 3 minutes later. He spoke to policemen outside the house and said his sister was very skilled with a gun, and they both went on hunting trips when they were younger. She knew exactly what to do with a rifle. He also said that he had laid the groundwork for the shooting unintentionally. He heard rabbits in the home, or so he said, so he loaded the rifle to go and shoot them, but then left the rifle and the casings out on the table and went home. The police would then have to wait for the armed response team. If Sheila was still inside and holding the gun, they couldn't go in without backup, an extreme backup at that, and Sheila knew how to work a gun, so they had to wait outside. Outside, Jeremy talked to the policemen about cars for a little bit, which confused them slightly. And once they went inside and found the bodies, Jeremy put on a massive show, shaking, crying, vomiting, at the sight of his dead family. A doctor was called to the scene, and they and Dr. Craig pronounced that the family had been dead several hours and was shot during the night, but he couldn't determine what time they were killed. Neville was found in the kitchen in his pajamas. He had been shot 8 times, 2 in the body and 6 to the face and head. He was beaten strongly, and whoever went after Neville engaged him in a struggle. June was found face down in the living room. She had been shot 7 times and once straight between the eyes. The 2 young boys, Daniel and Neville, 6 years old, were found dead in their bed. They had been shot as they slept. One of them still had his thumb in his mouth when he was found. Sheila was found last. She was found in the bedroom, in her pajamas, perfectly clean, virtually no blood on her. She had been shot 3 times, once in the throat and twice under the jaw. She was found clutching a Bible and the rifle. The pathologist confirmed that the gunshots that killed Sheila were shot from 3 inches away. Very possible that she could have shot herself. The police ruled this a murder-suicide, and the case was closed. The higher wounds on Sheila, the ones under her jawline, would have killed her instantly, but the one in her throat would have left her still able to move around a little bit. She could have shot herself in the throat and then tried again under the chin, but the ones under her chin would have killed her instantly, so why was there 2 gunshots underneath her chin? Blood and urine tests suggested that she had in fact taken her medication, and a couple of days previous to the murders, she had smoked cannabis. There were no marks on her body to determine a struggle, and her hands and feet were completely clean. The magazine for the rifle would have had to have been loaded twice already, not including the one that was already loaded when Jeremy suggested that he had loaded the rifle the first time. So it was loaded a total of 3 times in the night to shoot as many rounds as it did to kill the entire family. But her hands were completely clean. No evidence of lead transfer, no evidence of gunshot residue, and her fingerprints were not on the Bible that was found next to her. Still, police thought, open and shut, murder-suicide. One officer was so sure that it was a murder-suicide that he demanded that the cousins of the family were taken out of his office when they suggested to look into Jeremy more. He was so certain that this was not the case and had them escorted from his office. The investigation was sloppy to begin with. The carpets inside the house were burned. To spare Jeremy's feelings, the scene of crime officer removed the murder weapon without gloves, and the property wasn't searched after the bodies were cleared. It wasn't until the cousins who were searching the house themselves found a silencer in the gun cupboard with blood on it and red paint. It took 3 days. It took 3 days for the police to come and collect this, because they didn't think it had anything to do with the open and shut murder-suicide that Sheila had obviously committed. The officers barely took any notes when they were talking to Jeremy or anybody else. They didn't even interview the staff who worked on the farm to find out what had really gone on. Jeremy's clothes weren't examined until a month after the murders were committed. This case was such a mess that in the police force, doing a bamba became a well-known phrase for making a massive mess of things. It was absolute shithousery. Then the family's funeral came, and it wasn't until then that they decided Jeremy might have something to do with it. He was wisecracking, making strange jokes, After the funeral, him, his girlfriend Julie, and a couple of their friends went to Amsterdam. Jeremy inherited the money from his parents, and Julie inherited June's car. They sold Neville's for £900, which today's money would make £2,000, and Jeremy sold nude photos of his own sister to the newspaper, £20,000. In today's money, that would be £55,000, to try and get him a little bit more bank before he went away. Only one fingerprint on the rifle was actually Sheila's. The rest were unidentified, and some were Jeremy's. My camera died, so we may be in a different angle, but you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. Let's continue. I have drunk probably about a glass and a half of wine in that time, so we'll see how the rest of this goes. So the testimony of Julie Mungford, who was Jeremy's girlfriend at the time, was pivotal to the arrest of Jeremy Bamber. She changed her original statement to the police and said that Jeremy had been planning to kill his family the entire time. She originally supported him, but she eventually changed her questions after she started getting a little bit curious as to whether or not he was actually involved in the murders of his family. She called him a psychopath and tried to smother him. She alleged that he talked about his old father, his mad mother, and his good-for-nothing sister, and he hoped that the boys would be taken away from her. He also joked about dosing his parents with sleeping pills and setting the house on fire and make it look like Sheila had done it in one of her deranged moments. He theorised about different ways that he could go into the house and sneak in and out unnoticed, and different ways that he could kill each member of the family without being caught. He also tested his ability to kill by killing rats with his bare hands. Julie told the police about a call she received from Jeremy on the night of the killings. He stated that if he was going to kill his family, it would be now or never. When asked if he did it, Jeremy told her that he didn't, and he paid a friend to do it. He told this friend to make it look like Sheila had committed the murders and to place a Bible next to her to make it look like it was a religious killing. Apparently he paid this friend £2,000 to sneak in the back of the house, kill his family in the middle of the night, and leave, and blame the whole thing on Sheila. Based on Julie's testimony alone, the police decided they had enough evidence to arrest Bamber on suspicion of murder. He then went into a frenzy, blaming Julie, said it was her getting revenge on being jilted, because they'd broken up shortly before she started making these claims. He also told them that he'd entered through the back to test security and to prove that security on the farm was rubbish. He often came through the back door anyway and used a knife to get the door off its hatches. So get in. He also said that the rifle had the silencer taken off because the silencer didn't fit in the case alongside the rifle. To unpackage and package it properly, it couldn't have the silencer on it, otherwise it wouldn't fit in the box. He was released on bail and then went on holiday with his friends. He then tried to sell photos of Sheila to the papers for £20,000. When he landed back in England, he was arrested for the murders of the Bamber family. The prosecution moved that Jeremy was motivated by hate and greed. He wanted the money for the farm and the farm for his own and not have to split it with Sheila, especially after he'd found out that his mother wanted to bypass the two children and give the whole thing to the young boys instead. He drove to the house for dinner and drove home, and then cycled back to the house on his mother's bicycle that he'd borrowed a few days earlier. He entered through the downstairs window, took the rifle and went upstairs. He then fought with Neville, shooting him several times. Neville came downstairs to try and call somebody for help, and he was shot and killed in a struggle in the kitchen. He then went after June. He shot June in her bed, but she went downstairs and died. He shot Sheila where she was and staged the scene to make it look like she had killed herself. He removed the silencer and put it back in the cupboard and placed the Bible next to her. He removed the phone from the hook in the kitchen to make it look like his father had been interrupted making a call, and he left through the kitchen window, bashing it as he went back through so the catches would fall again, and it looked like somebody from inside the house had done all the damage. He cycled back to his home and called Julie, saying that he was worried about Sheila and had a bad feeling that something awful was going to happen in the house. He then called Chelmsford Police Station instead of 999 so there'd be a delay. Then he waited and drove to the house, slowly. He set the scene by saying his sister was experienced with guns, so police would have to wait for a backup, which would mean the body temp and determining when the bodies had actually died would be tampered with. they wouldn't know because he'd be stalling the police outside and stalling the call of the ME. They argued that he received no call from his father and 999 should have been his first response. If Sheila had indeed shot herself with the silencer on, she wouldn't have been able to reach. Once she'd turned the rifle back on herself, it would have been too far down for her to pull the trigger. She had no traces of gunpowder residue or lead from loading the rifle, and her long fingernails were intact. She was completely clean. Unless she'd had a shower and changed her clothes after she'd shot her entire family, there's no way Sheila could have pulled the trigger. The defence maintained that those who questioned Jeremy's relationship with his family were deranged, and that Julie was arguing for revenge after being left by Jeremy. Nothing was discovered on his clothes to suggest a struggle, but because his clothes were investigated a month after the murders, they weren't going to find anything. The defence continued to argue that Sheila was the killer, and that her body was completely clean because she'd cleansed herself of the killing, like some kind of ritual. If it was in fact a biblical killing, something like this wouldn't be out of the ordinary. She'd wash herself, change her clothes, and make sure she was okay, to then kill herself. It wasn't unheard of in ritual killings for this to be done. The jury had 3 points to consider. Did they believe Jeremy or Julie? Were they certain Sheila didn't do it? And did Jeremy get a phone call from his father at all? They deliberated for 9 hours, but eventually found Bamber guilty, and he was sentenced to 5 life sentences. Jeremy Bamber is still in prison today. He tried to go up for parole, but they obviously said no because he killed 5 people. So you are not allowed out of jail. Banned. You can stay exactly where you are, in prison, for killing 5 people. Rude, quite frankly. Worse than rude. Terrible. That's all I have to say for this one. Over and out. See you next time. I've got some spooky ghosts coming up on Saturday, so stick around for those. Feel free to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Cheers.